Tonight, assessing the damage here in Newfoundland. They're digging out, but they can't stock up.
So that's been since Friday, so now it's, I don't even know what day it is, Monday?
The challenges, the frustrations, and the acts of kindness.
Also tonight, in court on the case that's putting the squeeze on Canada. Top Chinese executive Meng Wanzhou argues against extradition to the United States. The BC girl handcuffed at a Canadian bank tells us her story.
I was scared, just the whole thing being handcuffed.
And Larry Walker's last chance.
His play stands up against anybody in baseball and in the history of baseball.
Will the Canadian star and former Expo finally make it into the Hall of Fame? This is The National.
You are looking at St. John's on its fourth day under state of emergency. 4 days of carving a city out of a record-breaking blizzard, and it's still snowed in, still shut down. That's why we're here tonight, where beyond snow, time is the enemy. A man lost in the storm is still missing. Supplies are running low. People need groceries, medicine. They need to go back to work. They need sleep. And they know they now need even more patience. Tonight, we have Newfoundland under the shadow of the storm. As people scramble for necessities and a path out, we'll show you places hammered by the blizzard, communities that are stronger for weathering it, and you'll get a first-hand look at the effort to push the snow back. Chris O'Neill-Yates has the story from the streets of St. John's, just like this one, where resources are stretched to the limit and even space is in short supply.
You can spot them all over town. Soldiers are a welcome sight. They're a lifeline to people stranded after the storm. At the Provincial Emergency Operations Centre, people are working out where they're needed.
Well, the military coming in right now actually works out great for us. They're going to be great assistance to all those vulnerable people who find themselves in their home, either can't get out, can't dig out, or can't get out and get their medications or whatever.
This storm left so much snow on St. John's streets, it will take days, maybe weeks, to clean it all up. Meanwhile, people are running out of critical household items, and some are getting antsy being housebound since Friday. That could be why cars are clogging some narrow streets. People running the risk of hefty fines unless they're out to get emergency gasoline or prescriptions. Snow removal is a challenge. The city is dumping it in the harbour. They're normally not allowed to do this, but they got permission from Ottawa because there's just nowhere else to put the snow. Sheldon Hines and Paul House live next to St. Clair's Hospital. Snow removal trucks pass by every few minutes, and they have to fight cars for space.
The main concern is the hospital. The number of ambulances coming up and going around here right now, it's absolutely amazing.
The more unnecessary traffic that is on the roads, the longer it's going to take to get this dealt with, honestly. If you don't need to be out, just don't be out.
And tempers, well, they're getting a little short, says actor Raul Baneja, who's filming a TV show here.
There was a man walking by who shouted to a driver, "You're not supposed to be on the road," and that was met with a 4-letter expletive. So I think people there's just not enough room on these roads.
So, Chris, with all the clearing that's been happening, is it fair to say it might ease some of the pressure tomorrow?
You might think that, and in the long run it might, but the city is lifting the restrictions tomorrow to allow supermarkets to open. Now, all of these people who've been holed up in their homes running out of provisions, everybody's going to be going out tomorrow. So we saw the competition between the trucks and the cars today, and there will be a whole lot more cars on the road tomorrow. So that's going to present some challenges. So it might get a little worse tomorrow before it gets better, but all of this is going to take some time.
Okay, Chris, thank you very much. You've been the eyes and ears for the entire country for the last little while. You and your colleagues at the Bureau, even including the great, Snowmageddon sleepover. We really appreciate it.
You're very welcome, Adrian.
All righty. An update on an urgent search for Joshua Wall. He went missing about an hour's drive west of here. Search and rescue workers were out for a third straight day. Now, residents in the area are still being encouraged to check their properties and their outbuildings in case he went to seek shelter. In some homes right now, the struggle is on to keep the lights on, to keep food on the table, to keep spirits up. Kayla Hounsell shows us that effort.
Marie Powell is helping out her neighbor who lives alone. She says for the past 4 days, it was pretty much all she could do. Her family lost power during the height of the storm.
So that's been since Friday, so now it's, I don't even know what day it is, Monday?
Hers was the only home on the street without electricity. That meant her family was a low priority for power crews. It hasn't been easy.
Sick 3-year-old, sick myself with a cold, my husband and a brand new puppy, and my mother who's sick as well. So that's been where we're to, living on potato chips and water and snacks and running the tap, hoping that nothing freezes.
With grocery stores closed, many are running out of food. Mark Wilson started a Facebook group to help people organize sharing the food they have.
It brings up a lot of issues where there's stigma attached to not having food, not having money, not stocking up before a storm. If people don't have the money to do that, they definitely don't do that. So we're trying to sort of help alleviate those points of disparity.
We could deliver something up to Louise.
His friends are baking bread in their own kitchen, just because they can. They're checking the Facebook group and delivering loaves to those in need.
The stores have been closed for 3 days now, so it's people don't necessarily have a lot. It's nice to be able to do something.
Nearby, we ran into a couple delivering muffins to firefighters.
Chocolate chip. Perfect, buddy. Thank you very much.
There is some relief in sight. A crew has arrived to get Marie Powell back on the grid.
Like, come on. What is it? Oh, yay.
And the food that's been refrigerated outside is going back in the kitchen. A silver lining while there is still a lot of work ahead. Kayla Hounsell, CBC News, St. John's.
We have more from St. John's still ahead on the National, including reflections on this giving community from one of its favorite sons.
Newfoundland and Labrador is the only place on Earth where a disaster could strike and you'd find yourself wishing you could be there for it.
Mark Critch on just how special Newfoundlanders are and why they're so prepared to deal with a crisis like this one ahead. And so for now, it is back to you in Toronto, Andrew, for the other news, starting with a big story on the other side of the country.
Yeah, today, Meng Wanzhou appeared in a Vancouver courtroom for the first day of her extradition hearing. The Huawei executive has been under house arrest for more than a year, accused of fraud by the U.S. And prosecutors there want her to face charges. China wants her freed. But as Greg Rasmussen explains, it is Canada who will decide this case that has garnered international attention.
Meng Wanzhou left her luxury home on the way to the courthouse as media from around the world watched. On arrival, more cameras. The crowd was so large, an overflow area had to be set up. Inside the courtroom, arguments focused on what's called double criminality. The law states that to extradite someone, there has to be a similar offense in both Canada and the United States. U.S. authorities have charged Meng with fraud for allegedly lying to a bank in violation of U.S. sanctions against Iran. Today in court, her lawyers argued there is no equivalent crime in Canada, telling the court, "This has every appearance of the United States seeking to enlist Canada to enforce the sanctions we have repudiated." An uphill battle, says this Vancouver lawyer.
Canadian prosecutors will be arguing that this is a red herring, this focus on sanctions. The real issue is whether Ms. Meng engaged in conduct that defrauded banks operating in the United States.
Cell phone giant Huawei is waging its own campaign to support Meng.
We think that she's very much a pawn in his trade dispute with China. We think Canada has been dragged into the middle of this.
Tension over this case has soured the Canada-China relationship and is widely blamed for China detaining 2 Canadians on spying charges. But the federal justice minister says he won't exercise his ministerial power to intervene.
We want Ms. Meng to have every legal protection that the Canadian legal system affords, and we think our process has done that.
These initial arguments will wrap up later this week, but this is only the first in a long string of legal challenges, meaning many more trips to court. Greg Rasmussen, CBC News, Vancouver.
Okay, I want to bring in Jason Proctor now from outside the courthouse because, Jason, you've been following this story from the very beginning. So tell me, what was it like to be inside that courtroom today?
You know, there was an electric atmosphere. There was a huge anticipation around this appearance. It's been more than a year in the coming. Meng Wanzhou has clearly wanted to get out there and argue that she should be released, that she shouldn't be extradited. You had media from around the world during this massive courtroom, which is full of Huawei executives, curious members of the public, and people who have followed this in the news and just wanted to see this woman herself in person make her appearance and make her case in front of a judge.
And over time, Jason, we have seen a change in how Meng Wanzhou has approached this publicly.
Yeah, you know, she made her first appearances in prison sweats in this very same courtroom, waiting to be released. She's since switched to designer dresses and these kind of shoes that accentuate the GPS ankle monitoring bracelet. We've heard from PR people with Huawei that essentially she's putting herself out there. She believes and has said she hasn't done anything wrong, and so she's trying to put herself out here and express her feeling that she's a victim here and that she's being used as some kind of political pawn. Whether or not a judge feels that way remains to be seen.
Okay, Jason Proctor, thanks very much.
Thank you.
And Meng is due back in court tomorrow morning. Well, the World Health Organization will hold an emergency meeting Wednesday about a dangerous outbreak in East Asia. A mysterious coronavirus has killed 3 people and infected more than 200. Now, first confirmed in the central Chinese city of Wuhan 3 weeks ago. It has since appeared in Shanghai, Beijing, and Shenzhen, and it's jumped China's borders, with cases in Thailand, Japan, and South Korea. What's more, authorities say it can now spread from human to human. And as you'll hear from Sasha Petrusik in Beijing, it all couldn't have happened at a worse time.
The wholesale seafood market in Wuhan sits shuttered, warning signs posted, and officials in protective suits investigating Ground Zero, the suspected source of the new virus. Animals at the market were the original suspects. But today on Chinese state TV, the health official in charge of the investigation said experts now know the virus can also make that other dangerous leap from person to person, leading to pneumonia, high fever, and difficulty breathing, sometimes death. A spokesman for China's foreign ministry says Beijing immediately informed the World Health Organization. And he says shortly after, China sent out genetic details of the new virus to researchers around the world. It's a coronavirus in the same family as severe acute respiratory syndrome, or SARS, which also spread from China, killing nearly 800 people worldwide in 2003. Once again now, the WHO is concerned.
There's also the possibility of super spreading events. The global community is very familiar with what has happened with SARS in the past, and this is something that is on our radar.
The response is now spreading, with a focus on identifying sick travelers coming from Wuhan. On some flights in China, health workers check for high fever before allowing passengers to leave. At other airports in the region and in the United States, screening machines will check Wuhan arrivals.
Still, the biggest concern is here in China itself, where the Chinese New Year's holiday is set to begin in just a few days. Hundreds of millions of people traveling across the country and abroad, the largest annual human migration, potentially worsening the spread. Sasha Petrusik, CBC News, Beijing.
Now back here in Canada, today was day 2 of the Liberal cabinet retreat in Winnipeg. It's a meeting to plot strategy for the upcoming session of Parliament, and for a minority government, that includes building bridges with Western Canada. David Cochran is there.
If there's a bright spot for the Liberals on the prairies, it's Manitoba, where they didn't lose all of their seats in the election, they only lost half.
What a pleasure it is to be back in Winnipeg, back in Manitoba.
So the Western outreach and photo ops continue.
We pride ourselves here on being Canadians first.
But it's clear there's a long way to go.
I think the outreach is good, it's noble, and I think the intention is real. but you'll measure the effectiveness as you should by results.
Results for Manitoba would be federal approval of a long-delayed flood protection program and accepting a Made in Manitoba climate plan that will soon be submitted to replace the federal carbon tax.
So I want respect from Ottawa for the fact that Manitoba has an incredible green record.
The Premier already has tremendous respect for me, tremendous respect from the Prime Minister.
As Deputy Prime Minister, Chrystia Freeland has to stick-handle these regional tensions. And while there were no agreements today, there was a promise to cooperate.
But what I believe Canadians want, and there is certainly the goodwill in Ottawa to do this, is for us to identify the areas of common interest and to work together.
But for Westerners, results will matter more than goodwill, as it won't be enough to simply be friendly to Manitobans while visiting friendly Manitoba. David Cochran, CBC News, Winnipeg.
There are a few friendly feelings between Ontario teachers and the provincial government tonight. An escalating labor dispute is threatening class time for more than 1 million students. Teachers' unions are engaging in rotating one-day strikes this week. Deanna Sumanak-Johnson takes a look at how parents handled day one and where things go from here.
With his school closed, kindergarten student Oliver Yang is spending the day at his dad's bike shop. Fun for Ollie, a little more work for Dad.
Obviously, contingency plans need to be in place to make sure that, like I can function at work as well as have him here. So yeah, it is a little bit, I have to manage things, right? Either call in extra staff.
It's very cold out today. Engineer Marcy Sanderson took the day off work and used it as a learning opportunity for her 5- and 8-year-olds.
We felt it was important to take the kids to the picket line, let them see what their teachers are doing, and so it shows some support to the teachers.
Among the teachers' top demands, wage increases that match inflation, smaller class sizes, and more special needs funding.
Snow pants first.
Also upsetting for teachers and some parents, the province's plan to impose mandatory e-learning.
The thought of trying to remove human interaction and put it in front of a screen is something we're always trying to fight against.
As the teachers hit the picket lines in sub-zero temperatures, the Public Teachers Union said the Ontario government gave them no choice.
This government and this Minister of Education are not at a table actually bargaining. If we were bargaining, we could have avoided this.
Cuts hurt kids. The province says the teachers union won't consider the option of a private mediator.
I want to retain talent in this province. I want the best educators in the nation teaching our children, but we pay them well.
Okay, you can bring them.
Day camps and drop-off centers like this one are in high demand. And while the government is offering parents up to $60 a day for each day of missed school, most would prefer a swift resolution instead.
I do hope that they can put some of the rhetoric behind them, get back to the table.
If they don't, the worry is strikes that could go on longer than a day. Deanna Sumanak-Johnson, CBC News, Toronto.
We have new details now in a shocking story that happened in Vancouver last month. A 12-year-old Indigenous girl and her grandfather entered a bank to open an account, then left it in handcuffs. Now, CBC News is not reporting the girl's last name, but today she spoke to us about the toll all of this has taken. Here's Tanya Fletcher.
I try my hardest not to think about it.
12-year-old Tori Ann is trying not to think about December 20th. That's the day she and her grandfather had an appointment to open her an account at this Bank of Montreal branch. Instead, the police were called and the two were handcuffed right out front.
They came over and grabbed us and led us outside, handcuffed us, told us we weren't under arrest, we were being detained, and then they read us our rights.
They were detained for 45 minutes, Tori Ann in tears.
I was scared. Just the whole thing, being handcuffed, and even after all the identification, we showed that we are who we are.
The problem, according to BMO, had to do with verifying their identification, which included government-issued Indian status cards. Tori Ann's grandfather says the employee questioned them, became suspicious, and left the room with their ID. Moments later, officers showed up. He calls it nothing short of racial profiling.
Like if it was non-native grandfather and granddaughter, I don't think they would have done that. I don't think they would have done that at all.
Hasn't really hit me yet.
Boycott BMO!
The incident triggered a landslide of criticism. Protests outside the bank, condemnation from the mayor.
I feel so badly for what happened to them.
And an apology from Vancouver's police chief.
And we're very sorry the way that this all played out, and we know now after doing the investigation that there was no crime.
Eventually, words of regret from a BMO president, too.
People are angry, and they have every right to be. I'm accountable for this situation here, and this is a mess from start to finish.
BMO says staff have been reprimanded, and it's now launched an Indigenous Advisory Council. Still, the family is considering a human rights case against the bank and possibly police. Tanya Fletcher, CBC News, Vancouver.
And we have more news ahead on The National.
My God-given right to have it.
Your God-given right.
My God-given right.
Susan Ormiston is in the middle of a divisive gun rights rally in Virginia. That's next. Plus, alarming new information about the effect of food insecurity on your lifespan.
And back to Newfoundland, an interview with the Premier and a special essay from Mark Critch on the power of community. We're back in 2.
It was Martin Luther King Jr. Day in the United States, named after the advocate of nonviolence. But in Virginia, fears of violence led to heavy security at a protest by gun owners. Now remember, it was 2.5 years ago in Charlottesville, Virginia, where violence at a so-called Unite the Right rally led to the death of a woman run over by a car. Susan Ormiston was in Virginia today.
We will not be ruled! We will not be ruled!
Armed and ready to fight any attempt to curb guns in Virginia. 22,000 protesters, many with weapons, determined to keep owning all of them.
It's my God-given right to have it.
Your God-given right.
My God-given right, my constitutional right to have it. Okay? And nobody, no tyrannical government is going to come and take it away from me. It's not going to happen.
Gun owners here are resisting new measures proposed by Democrats, who for the first time in decades control the General Assembly, setting up a battle over a long, proud history here of liberal gun laws, including owning assault rifles. Clive Cornwell, a hunter, has several. But why do you need an automatic rifle to kill a deer?
Because you might miss them the first time.
You might miss them the first time.
It might be 5 or 6.
State and city police swarmed the Capitol. Snipers watched, drones were banned, all precautions in this tense time in America.
Trump pants out now! Trump pants out now! No white supremacy! No white supremacy!
There was no violence, just face-offs.
This system cannot be reformed!
Between anti-Trump protesters, quickly surrounded by police, creating space between supporters.
4 more years! 4 more years!
As you can see, this is clearly shaping up to be one of the most divisive issues in the U.S. election year. President Trump has already tweeted that the Virginia government is trying to take these people's weapons away, and that's what they get for voting Democrat.
Don't be a Democrat, get yourself a Trump hat!
Guns and rights, signaling what's to come in 2020. Susan Ormiston, CBC News, Richmond, Virginia.
Now to some other stories making news across Canada tonight.
اعلام کردیم که به حال این عزیزانی که از دست رفتن
Iran says it does not recognize the dual citizenship of those killed aboard the downed Ukrainian plane, which complicates the already difficult process of repatriating the remains of some Canadian victims. Iran's foreign ministry says those individuals are considered Iranian only. 57 of the passengers on Flight 752 were Canadian, but it's not clear how many had dual citizenship. The driver of a pickup truck has died after an accident involving a school bus full of students. It happened on Highway 337, about an hour north of Montreal, near Rawdon. Most of the teenagers on the school bus were okay. Police say only 3 were treated in hospital for minor injuries. The highway was closed in both directions as investigators looked into the cause.
And it was unacceptable a year ago. It's still unacceptable today.
Gilles Duceppe and his family are suing the luxury seniors residence where their 93-year-old mother died a year ago today. The former Bloc Québécois leader's mother died of hypothermia after being trapped outside during a winter storm. The family is seeking $1.25 million in damages. They say they hope the lawsuit will force the residents to prevent similar deaths from occurring in the future.
We're standing
standing up for workers' pensions, we're standing up for workers' rights, and this is how they treat us here.
And Regina police arrested Unifor National President Jerry Dias, along with at least 2 other union members, following a tense day on the picket line outside the Co-op refinery complex. That's an oil refinery. The union says hundreds of members from across the country barricaded at least 6 entrances to the refinery today. It's the latest in what has been a weeks-long hostile labor dispute. The union workers issued a strike notice in early December and were locked out. We have more news next on The National, including a scary fact about food insecurity. Those who worry about where their next nutritious meal is coming from can live significantly shorter lives. That's next.
Plus, on day 4 of Newfoundland's state of emergency, we speak with the Premier about what's next. There's still so much digging out to do and supplies are running out. How the province will manage it just ahead.
In health news tonight, the real cost of food insecurity. 4 million Canadians can't afford regular access to healthy meals. As Christine Burek explains, new research shows that could take years off their lives.
We all need some nutritious food to keep us going, but for a time, Laurice Liu just couldn't afford it.
It feels like I was hungry, but it was just, I'm trying to feed myself for a quick meal.
After moving to Canada, Lou says her son's needs came first, then rent and the bills, leaving her to eat low-cost, usually processed foods.
So my mental health kind of breaking down in a way that you feel depressed.
Stats Canada estimates 1 in 8 Canadian households faces food insecurity. A new study tracked over 500,000 adults over 12 years and found not being able to buy enough food can take years off a person's life.
For example, we saw severely food insecure people died on average 9 years earlier than the food secure ones.
Researchers say severe food insecurity was associated with death from heart and respiratory diseases as well as diabetes. The same people were also at higher risk of dying from infectious parasitic diseases, unintentional injuries, and suicides.
The paper reinforces what I'm seeing on the ground.
Dr. Gary Block says a universal basic income could go a long way toward dealing with the effects of poverty by offering every citizen a minimum income to cover the basic cost of living, giving them a sense of financial security.
If you're living chronically without enough access to food, you're going to die earlier. That's a really scary prospect.
We have to really fight for it.
Lou is no longer food insecure. She now works at the food bank she once used. She's grateful to be able to buy nutritious food for herself, but says she'll never forget how it feels to quietly be hungry. Christine Burek, CBC News, Toronto.
Next on The National, what's making news around the world tonight?
Plus, if you've been here, you know the spirit of community that sets Newfoundland apart. Hometown boy Mark Critch explains why this province is so capable of weathering the storm.
Welcome back. Here's some other stories making news around the world tonight. Pretty drastic change in weather today for parts of fire-ravaged Australia. A storm bringing golf ball-sized hail tore through large parts of the country's southeast, leaving behind smashed office windows, car windshields in the nation's capital as well. Strong winds have also generated dust clouds, temporarily blacking out the sky in some places. Frustration and anger continue to grow in Puerto Rico after a warehouse full of emergency supplies was discovered over the weekend. It's believed some of the aid has been there unused since the devastating Hurricane Maria hit the island 2 years ago. The warehouse contained everything from water and baby formula to heaters. After the warehouse was discovered, Puerto Rico's emergency director was fired. There were scuffles at the Mexico-Guatemala border today as hundreds of U.S.-bound migrants attempted to cross a river after being blocked at a nearby border bridge. Under pressure from Washington, Mexico has cut off migration routes to the U.S. Mexican troops with riot shields tried to stop the migrants from climbing the riverbank but hundreds appear to have breached police lines. And Malaysia says it has sent back 150 containers of plastic waste to 13 countries, including Canada. The country's environment minister says Malaysia does not want to be the world's dumping ground. More shipments of recycled trash have been going to Southeast Asia since 2018, when China banned the import of plastic waste. 11 containers are on their way to Canada, with more to come. Okay, let's get back to our top story now. The aftermath of that historic blizzard in eastern Newfoundland. Adrian is in the thick of it in St. John's.
It's now day 4 of a state of emergency in the city, Andrew, and everywhere the big dig continues.
Where are your cars? Under those drifts. It's going to take days.
People continue to say they've never seen anything like it. Roads clogged with drifts, whole cars swallowed by snow. Anyone armed with a shovel is a hero. Plowing is a priority, and so is patience, as streets make way for machines and customers wait at the precious few stores that are open. The storm and its aftermath have been a huge test, and it could be a while before life is back to normal. With so much snow to deal with, progress can be measured a shovel at a time.
High -19, wind chill -38 this morning.
Get to St. John's. The military heading in however they can. Roads still not passable, but already traveled. And the more people ventured out, the more they realized the snow was just part of it. Storm surges taking on a yacht club, collapsing a breakwater in on itself so profoundly, some 100 boats are now trapped. Not to mention what the wind did.
We're in a bit of a spot here.
Well, it's going to take quite a bit just to dig out the channel.
And we have boats, again, that are overwintering here from as far away as Belgium and the US, Norway, and they'll be coming back this spring, and so a lot of work's got to be done over the next couple of months.
The realization of the storm's wrath has taken time because 4 days later, some are just now venturing out. Can only venture out thanks to the likes of Billy Mercer. 16-hour shifts since Friday, his own home not entirely cleared out yet. So it's starting to rain a little bit. That changes it for you, eh?
Yes, it makes it harder and heavier to push. It's slippery.
Yeah. New wrinkles, freezing rain, and mist. And the ever-present fear the longer those snow mountains stay there, the more kids will be tempted to do what kids do and build tunnels. Plus, the more the frustration of residents will surge. How could they be angry at you? You're opening up their path.
Just, I suppose, they're more out for shoveling. And I suppose everybody gets tired of it.
Fatigue is real at this point. And while the hundreds of troops are making a difference for the most vulnerable, in classic Newfoundland form, it is neighbors making it work for everyone else. Flash mobs of generosity organized online, realized streetside. This is Mount Pearl outside St. John's after a call went out that some seniors were stuck inside, needed any help they could get. They got more than they could imagine.
Hello, nice to meet you. Nice to meet you.
Hi, very nice to meet you.
One man asked on radio today, is there anywhere you'd rather be in a snowstorm than Newfoundland? Judging by how they've just pushed through with flair the last 4 days, it's hard to imagine being snowed in anywhere better. Just look at all that snow. So many challenges ahead. Earlier this evening, we put that to the Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador, Dwight Ball. So, Premier, how long do you anticipate the full force of the state of emergency to be in effect?
It depends on which community you're talking to, because some communities have responded much quickly in getting their infrastructure back in place, and the cleanup has been very different if you get outside of St. John's. This is an old city, and it really wasn't built for this much snow or this much traffic. And so what we're seeing right now in St. John's, especially in the downtown core, there's a lot of snow, narrow streets, as we can see right here this evening. So it really depends on which area you're in. So tomorrow people will be given the state of emergency, will be lifted with conditions to allow people to fill up their freezers again and get some extra food in. So it could be a while, yeah. It's a major cleanup. There's a lot of snow that needs to be moved.
You know, listening to you talk, it reminds me, some people do tell us that they're confused, in part because there's states of emergency that have been lifted 20, 30 kilometers away, but not here. But it's also the way it's enforced, it seems to be tough for some people to understand in terms of getting more food. Maybe they can get medicine, but they can't get food, and that's where the frustrations flare. What do you say to them?
Well, in the province, there's, from a state of emergency point of view, when you get a weather event like this here, the provincial government has a responsibility to take care to clean up on provincial infrastructure. We've been able to do that, and all the major roads and thoroughfares, they've been open, so people can access the services. So what happens when you get into communities, in particular like here in St. John's, the state of emergency is put in place with the conditions by the city of St. John's. If you go to some of the neighboring communities that you just mentioned, like in Mount Pearl as an example, it's a different community, and they can actually put different conditions in for the state of emergency. Now, what we've been able to do is get the communities to work closely together, but if you're living in Mount Pearl and your streets are in better conditions than you would see here in St. John's, it's only fair in that community that they could get out and access the services. In St. John's, it's a little different, and because there's a lot more work to do here.
What is the most acute need as you see it right now?
Well, you know, for me, the priority is making sure that people are safe. And so for us, it's making sure that we have access to our health care. These are provincial government responsibilities. Make sure that the health care authorities, they have their centers open and people can access those services. You know, the focus will continue to shift now to schools and so on. We could anticipate that schools will be closed for the next few days for sure, because we need to make sure that our roads are safe to travel on and people can get on their school buses and kids can get to school in a safe manner.
We know that some people are so eager to get out, some feeling actually quite physically claustrophobic the way the snow has been piling up. What are you hearing most often from people?
A lot the same thing. People are saying, we're in day 4 now, and I just need to get out and enjoy some of the fresh air. I need to get out and get some exercise. So that's anticipated. So tomorrow, as I said, the city of St. John's will be lifting and putting in place conditions where people can get out and about. But this is not about making sure that people are left in closed environments. Getting out is good mental health and good physical health for people as well, as they deal with what is a very difficult situation in the province right now.
All right, Premier, thank you very much. Best of luck to you.
Thank you very much.
All right, take care.
Thank you.
So we've been hearing some pretty incredible stories of the aftermath of the storm. Many people pointing to the spirit ingrained in those who live here. Well, we found someone who carries that DNA. Here's Mark Critch of 22 Minutes. His thoughts take us to break.
I was in Halifax when the big storm hit. I immediately made for the airport to try and make it home. Newfoundland and Labrador is the only place on Earth where a disaster could strike and you'd find yourself wishing you could be there for it. I FaceTimed in as my friends and family gathered together in one house so they could wait out the storm together. I didn't want to miss what was coming. Not the unmatched fury of the storm, but the equally insuppressible resilience of the people. We're used to being stormbound together.
Wow!
It's why we're such good talkers and singers.
We're down to the asphalt, boys.
Newfoundland was settled by people who had to depend on each other to survive.
I ran out of gas, and so I'm picking up gas for the neighborhood.
Your rope was your neighbor's rope. Her bread was your bread. You still see that in a crisis. Our first responders worked until they nearly fainted, but there were eager arms to catch them as they fell. When one nurse came home after a 40-hour shift to a house encased in snow, the whole street came out to clear away. There's a line in an old folk song here that goes, "You can always depend on the Oldfords and Whites to render assistance in all your life's plights. To help a kind neighbor is part of their lives. The same can be said for their children and wives." It was written in the 1880s. It could just as well have been written Friday night. And now, the military is here to help. It kills us in a way. We can no longer mock Toronto, and that is as much a part of our identity as fishing. I don't know much, but I do know this. They will go home a few pounds heavier, and a good third of them will be in a relationship by the time they leave. After all this time indoors, I'm pretty sure our population problem will soon be fixed by a boom the likes of which we have never seen before.
Awesome.
In the midst of it all, a baby was born. The parents made a post on social media asking for help tackling the 2.5-foot drift in front of their home. So many people showed up to help that you could barely find a space for your shovel to help dig. Of course, the baby's last name is Snow, because even states of emergency have a little poetry in them in Newfoundland. Baby Snow, you're a very lucky young man. When your parents tell you the story of your birth, they will tell you how a bunch of people they didn't know fought through the biggest storm in history to welcome you home. And in doing so, they will tell you everything you need to know about the place where you live.
Tomorrow is a pretty big day for this guy, former Montreal Expo Larry Walker. It's his last chance to get voted into the Baseball Hall of Fame. Starting 5 years after retirement, a major leaguer of his stature can be eligible for up to 10 years. For Walker, this is year 10, though, so time's almost up. But whether or not the sports writers who control his fate vote him in, Jamie Strachan shows us a career that was a special Canadian achievement.
It's this one hard to deep left center field. Wow. What a start for Larry Walker.
Larry Walker did everything well on the baseball field. But the writers who decide who gets into the Hall of Fame have been slow to embrace the Canadians' impact on America's game. Former Canadian major leaguers think it's a no-brainer.
You know, of course we're all biased and we want to see a Canadian get in, but you know, I think the numbers bear it out. I think he deserves to be in there, and I hope he will.
Whether he's Canadian, American, Puerto Rican, wherever, he's a guy whose numbers stand up and his play stands up against anybody in baseball and in the history of baseball.
Not quite been as good with the gloves. Nobody's going to catch this.
Walker's 21st of the year.
Walker starred for the Montreal Expos and the Colorado Rockies. His achievements are impressive. 3 batting titles, 9 gold gloves, and the winner of the 1997 MVP award.
And Walker with his 4th hit of the night.
But the value of his statistics is controversial. His best years were played in the thin air of Colorado's Coors Field, where the ball traditionally travels farther.
I played for a major league team that happens to be in Denver. If that's a problem, it's going to be an issue for them, and get rid of the team and move it elsewhere.
He also played during an era defined by steroids, something Walker has never been linked to.
No needles went in my ass. I played the game clean. It's almost like Coors Field is my PED.
Walker didn't play a lot of baseball growing up, but the Expos were attracted to his raw talent. He turned that talent into a 17-year major league career, always maintaining the quintessential Canadian humility.
So many times you meet people you look up to, you know, your heroes or whatever you want to call them, and you can sometimes be let down. I've never been let down by Larry.
More importantly, he's shown a generation of Canadian baseball players that anything is possible, maybe even the Hall of Fame. Jamie Strachan, CBC News, Toronto.
And next on The National, the lucky guy who moved to St. John's 2.5 weeks ago.
That was something unlike I've ever seen before. A little unsettling for a brand new Newfoundlander.
A new arrival's perspective on Newfoundland's big blizzard right after this.
There is not much winter can dish out that a Manitoban cannot take. Certainly winter here in Newfoundland may be a bit of a different beast. But when Winnipegger Jacob Hurd came to St. John's to be with his girlfriend just a couple of weeks ago, nothing could have prepared him for what was coming, and his reaction is tonight's moment.
I knew that Newfoundland got some pretty harsh winters. A few of my coworkers in the weeks before my move were, getting a kick out of showing me pictures from previous blizzards. So I knew I was in for something. But coming from Manitoba, I figured I've seen some pretty bad storms before, but wasn't quite prepared for this. We're talking in some places here. I think people have reported over 12 feet of snow outside their front door. So it's been pretty crazy. It was something very otherworldly. It felt like the snowstorm you might see in a science fiction movie or something like that. A lot of sort of moaning as the house shifts. So yeah, a little unsettling for a brand new Newfoundlander. The community has come out in droves to help each other out. I've seen people, snowboarding and tobogganing down streets. So it's just amazing to see that, that people aren't just stewing about it. People can actually make the most of it and have fun.
Well, if you thought this was scary, wait until he gets screeched in. Adrian, though, I do wonder, I mean, you've been on the ground there for a little while now. You've had a chance to see and hear from folks who are working their way through this. What struck you?
A couple things. First thing is, you know, I grew up a couple blocks from a subway, so a lot of this is new to me. But people here instinctively know that you need to keep a shovel inside, too, sometimes to get yourselves out. And I was speaking with the Premier earlier and asked him what surprised him. And he said that speaking with a woman who felt claustrophobic because the snow had gone past the height of her windows for the last 4 days, and she felt so locked in. And it is a horrifying thought. But everyone here is managing just so impressively. That is the National for Monday, January 20th. Good night.
Good night.